There we go. Well, welcome. So glad to have many of you online today. This is, of course, Neighboring 101, and this is actually our 30th session of this class. I'm glad you're here. This is the regular program where we get together and we talk with leaders in the neighboring movement nationwide, and we discover that organizations and individuals can use the art and skill of neighboring as part of the community and personal development. And as you probably know, one of our goals for our attendees is to encourage them to take steps toward making their neighborhoods clean, safe, and friendly. And if we all cared about our neighbors and did that, we would change the world one street at a time. So glad that you're here with us. As a reminder, for those watching on video or those that are here today but may not always be able to be here in person, the videos of each class are available on YouTube, but they are unlisted. And so the only way you get those links are in the reminder emails for this class or the recap emails. So don't just trash those emails if you have some past sessions to look at. That's where you get those links to those YouTubes, plus a few bonus videos that are included in that. Well, we're having some interesting conversation in chat. I had asked when we started, where do you live now and where do you wish that you lived? And it looks to me like the majority of people love where they live right now. So that's encouraging to see, I think. Maybe that should be expected from a group that's interested in neighboring and improving their neighborhoods. Maybe that's what we should have expected. But if you haven't yet, feel free to share where you live and where you wish that you lived in our chat section. You can use that chat throughout the class to ask questions or comment or send encouragements or privately message other class members. This is part of this class is about building a network as well. So maybe others you want to reach out to. Just an update on the class overall, and then we'll give an introduction and get started. We now have 734 people officially registered in Neighboring 101. Class members come from 94 of Missouri's 115 counties. And we actually have 38 states represented now, which blows my mind. There's that much interest in the topic, but it's exciting. And I wanted to mention a few of our new class members just this month. We welcome Nellie Quinn from St. Louis, Linda Spangler from Joplin, Missouri, Kate, I think we just saw Kate's name earlier, from Columbus, Ohio, Cher Abraham from St. Louis, Sandra Johnson from St. Charles, and Suzanne Luther from Jefferson City. If you're a first-time attendee live in person, we welcome you. Thanks for being here, and thanks for joining a growing network of people interested in this idea of becoming an engaged neighbor and what that means and how to be a better neighbor overall for Neighboring 101. Well, our special guest today, I know Melanie Warnick is a nationally known author. I know you've probably been reading about her as I've been sending reminders. She's a little under the weather today. She may need to take occasional coughing breaks for a coughing fit or something. And so we're going to really do today more like a conversation for her to maybe hopefully save her voice a little bit and prevent her from having coughing spasms. But I also invite each of you to join in that conversation today. Share comments or questions in the chat, and you can always jump in with questions as well. Melanie Warnick is the author of two really good books I would highly recommend. One, This Is Where You Belong, The Art and Science of Loving the Place That You Live. And the newest book is If You Could Live Anywhere. Melanie's work has appeared. She's a freelance author, and she is a busy person. She has had work appear in the New York Times, Reader's Digest, Fast Company, The Guardian, Slate, Quartz, CityLab, Women's Day, Good Housekeeping, Redbook, the Oprah Magazine, Psychology Today. I mean, you talk about running the whole gamut of publications. That is a wide spread of topics and backgrounds. But so a very busy author. And she's also been on a number of podcasts and radio shows. One of them that she was on is one of my personal favorites, is Strong Towns, if you're not familiar with that podcast, but she was a guest on that podcast at one time. Melody is also a chronic mover. I think she will confess to that today in her presentation, but she has fallen in love with her adopted hometown of Blacksburg, Virginia, where she currently lives with her husband and 2 daughters. Let me add just 2 other comments to personalize this a bit. I really enjoyed her book. Hopefully this shows up. Well, you get the idea. This is where you belong. That's the problem with having a blurred background, isn't it? I really enjoyed her book, This Is Where You Belong. In that book, she kind of dives into the research around place attachment and what helps us develop those deep senses of connection. And then she travels around America to see it in action. We may read a few excerpts from this today to get some comments from her as part of our conversation. But also have to give a shout out to her book, If I Could Live Anywhere, because she makes mention in that book of this class of Neighboring 101. So that would be another reason for me to love Melanie and to love that book, because she gave us a shout out in that. So I'd highly recommend either one of those books. And Melanie, thank you for taking the time to be here today with us live. Thank you.
I am super happy to be with you. And I apologize in advance for the coughing that you will probably hear. I'm going to try and mute myself and not blast your eardrums. But yeah, I am a little recovering from illness. But yeah, super happy to be with this class. And what David didn't mention is I hit him up for an interview for one of these freelance magazine articles about neighbors. For Subaru Drive magazine. Haven't seen that one yet, but hopefully coming out soon. And yeah, I think this group is fantastic, and I'm really excited to join you today.
Well, there's a lot of interest in the topic, as you probably noticed with your books. You've hit a nerve with these ideas and building a sense of place. Do you mind sharing a little bit of your story and background, how you approach that topic, or how you got interested in that topic about loving where you live, or feeling like you belong there? Because you did move around a lot, and it was part personal, I think.
It totally was personal. And it's funny because I went through a period after having grown up in California, never moved at all the first 18 years of my life, and went away to college. And at the end of college, I got married. And my husband and I went through a period of about 12 or 13 years where we were moving every couple of years. And, with good reason, we moved to Maryland for first jobs out of college, and then moved to Utah for another job and to get a little closer to family, and then Iowa for grad school, and Austin, Texas. And we ended up in Blacksburg, Virginia. And the fact that we had moved to 5 states in 12 years blew my mind. I have since met people who have lived in like 30 states and moved 40 times in 40 years. So I now realize that I am pathetic and not really that mobile compared to most people. But at the time it felt like, man, we just were moving a lot, and it sort of blew me away how you would move to a new place and your life would get really different for a while. And every place kind of had its own personality. There were places that we moved that felt like they fit us better, where we had an easier time making friends. There were places we moved where it felt like we didn't fit. And almost immediately started thinking, oh, we've made a terrible mistake here. How do we get out of it? And I just became really curious about what is actually going on in our places, and what makes the difference between a place that you move to and feel at home right away and fall in love with it versus a place that is a little bit more of a struggle. And, the thing that really drove me to write the book was moving to a place that at the time was a struggle. My family had been living in Austin, Texas for a couple of years, but my husband found his dream job at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia. And so he got it, and we picked up and moved. This was in 2012. And I don't know if anyone's done that, moving from a big city to a smaller town thing. But it is a challenge sometimes, like I moved and immediately was like, there is no good Mexican food here. And, I am, I felt like, we were in the Appalachian Mountains and everything felt very Southern and kind of different because of that. And it is my firm belief that moving almost always sucks, is just kind of on the face of it a challenging life scenario. But compound that with moving to a place where you don't know anyone, you don't have friends, it feels very foreign. And so in that situation, it was just like, okay, this is not the right place for us, and let's pack it in and move again. But my husband had just started this job, and my kids, who were then in kindergarten and fifth grade, had just started school. And I realized pretty quickly that we weren't going to be moving immediately, and that I needed to figure out how to feel okay in this town, how to fall in love with it, essentially. So that led me down this whole rabbit hole of investigating what actually is happening when people develop that connection with the community they live in. And I've been a writer for a long time. I love an internet rabbit hole. And so I started doing research and realized, that there's a name for this, and it's place attachment. And people move to communities or live in communities where they've lived for a long time, and they can develop place attachment there, which is basically that feeling of connectedness, that feeling of belonging that we can have in a community. And, the research says that it is incredibly valuable for people to feel that sense of belonging in a place, that it's good for your health. It's good for your mental health. It's good in general for well-being. It's also good for communities economically. And, the other part of it is that I realized this is something we can create for ourselves. That at least was my hypothesis at the beginning, that through certain behaviors we could develop place attachment for ourselves. And so that became my goal in Blacksburg. And the spoiler alert is that is what This Is Where You Belong is about. It's about my attempts to develop place attachment in Blacksburg, for better or worse. And you can tell how it turned out because it's been 11 years almost, and we're
Wow.
still living here. Yeah. And it's crazy because, looking in the chat and seeing, we have a mix of people going, I live in, here's the town I live and I love it, I wouldn't live anywhere else. But we definitely have a few who are saying, I live in X town, but really want to be in Y, like, I think that's the other thing, just to make a long answer even longer. Why I wrote If You Could Live Anywhere is because I think there's still always a part of me that's thinking about the next place or, all the places that I could be living. And I became really fascinated by the fact that, especially during COVID, but even before, many people became location independent in their work.
Mm.
They really weren't tied to a particular city the way we have been in the past. And lots of people were all of a sudden free to make those choices about where they were going to live. And I think I find that really fascinating to think about, how do we make those choices? How do we end up in a place that increases our chance of developing place attachment, a place that maybe will help us feel like we belong a little more? So that is kind of my obsession with place. Why I love thinking and talking about it.
One of the things I love about the book, and probably one of the reasons that you're getting invited to go places and speak on this, I think you're heading to Oklahoma here soon to speak at a conference there, or maybe you just finished up there. But I know you're being sought after on the topic, and it's a growing topic of popularity. But one of the things I love about your book is you were very transparent about how you felt about the move and the challenges, but you didn't have a very long pity party over it. And you don't write about what someone else can be doing to help you feel attached. You really jumped in with both feet and took efforts on your own to build that attachment, from visiting farmers markets and finding local food and local festivals. And it seems like a lot of people, it seems like I see people who prefer to complain about it, but never jump in to try and do anything about it. So I loved your example of really setting out to develop that place attachment, because it's a process, I think.
Right. And, I meet people all the time who will read my book and be like, yeah, I've done a lot of those things because, what I did, you mentioned a few examples, going to the farmer's market or walking in my neighborhood or trying to get to know neighbors. um, none of it is earth shattering. And I think people who are conscious about uh, how their behavior impacts their experience of a place will probably come to a lot of these things on their own. And what I really do is kind of help explain some of the science behind why these strategies work and give a name to it. Like when we talk about place attachment, people get it right away. And they usually know right away whether that's them or not, like whether they feel attached to their own community or whether it's maybe something they're struggling with. So, these concepts are things that pretty much everyone has experienced. We know what it's like to live in a place we love, and we probably, a lot of us know what it's like to live in a place that is a little harder to feel affectionate about. But it's helpful sometimes to just have someone spell it out for you. And so I think too, there for sure are people who move to communities and kind of they want the community to come to them, and they want things to be made easy for them. And so when they reach that first sort of roadblock of, I don't fit in here, or this town is missing something that I wish it had, they kind of shut down. And I hope that people who, read the book or have some concept of this, how to develop place attachment, realize that they can proactively create this. But it is something you have to be kind of intentional about. And, we all have people in our communities who are never going to be that intentional, or maybe
Well,
resist that.
it's a skill that we should probably give a little more thought to. I know in your book you mentioned that the average American moves 12 times in their life. I've moved once, so this is again confirmation I'm way below average. And then also you mentioned that 37% of Americans live in the town where they grew up. But that leaves I'm not very good at math, but 50 some odd 60 here that have moved at least once. So it's something that we should probably all give thought to practicing and getting better at. Kate here, and I believe Kate is from Portland. I think I saw that earlier. She mentions in chat, in your book, you talked about attending an event that might not be your cup of tea, like visiting a skateboard store. Could you elaborate on the benefits of attending events that are outside your comfort zone?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kate. Thank you. So for people who haven't read the book, what happened is I went to a cash mob, which is the idea is to support local businesses by, kind of you get a group of people together and everyone agrees to go to a certain locally owned store and spend money there. And in my case, I didn't know what the store was until I showed up and the organizer had announced it's this skateboarding shop down the street. And my immediate reaction was, I am a middle-aged mom and this is not really where I can foresee spending $20. But, I was at this event and I went and was surprised to discover that, this store I had never been inside, that was in downtown Blacksburg, actually was super cool. And, there were things that I was willing to spend money on. And also there was this, kind of cool interaction with the person behind the counter, who was the owner of the store, who really appreciated having residents come out and support his business. It mattered to him. But, to Kate's question, I think moving to a new place in general is 100% doing something outside of your comfort zone. Like, you are immediately thrust into the circumstance where showing up for almost anything requires doing something outside of your comfort zone. And, the value in that is, like I found with this skateboard shop, you can be surprised by things that you didn't want to do, that you thought weren't going to be valuable or enjoyable, and all of a sudden they turn out to be a good experience. And that's something that I've discovered about place attachment is we do better with place attachment if we simply just embrace what our town is good at, rather than what we wish our town was good at. Like, I moved to a college town where, one of the big things here is college football. It plays a large role in our community, especially all during the fall. And I am someone who has always said, I don't care about sports, like this is just, it's not my thing. But when I moved here and I started kind of working towards developing place attachment, I realized this is something that my town cares about. Yes, I love that. Focus on what's strong, not what's wrong. And this was something my town excelled at. My town excels at college football, not the actual football team. The Hokies did not have a good season last year, but just people who live here, we love it. And I could always stay on the outside of that and just be like, not really into football. Or I could go buy the t-shirt and, decide, I guess I'm into college football now, like I'm a Virginia Tech fan because that's what's happening in my town. And I think that metaphor of buying the t-shirt is one that I think of a lot, that in our communities, we sometimes have literal t-shirts with the name of our town on them, but even if we don't, we can choose to wear the metaphorical t-shirt, embrace what your town is about, what your town is good at, even if it does feel like it's outside of your comfort zone. And either you will learn that it's actually something you enjoy more than you thought, which I think has happened for me with football, or you will discover that even if it never becomes your thing, there are some benefits of simply showing up, and puts you in a position where maybe you're meeting new people, or you're you are experiencing things about your community that you didn't know about before.
Well, sounds like you probably have a terrific t-shirt collection, Virginia Tech football. And I'm guessing you probably picked up a Tony Hawk skateboarder t-shirt there.
Oh yeah,
and,
it's all skateboarder t-shirts at my house.
And so look at you go.
I know.
Well, a few other comments here. Laura just shares that her family growing up moved around a lot, and one of the first things we always did was find a church that always provided a small community within our new community where we could make friends and build attachments and stuff. And great example. And focusing on what's wrong and not what's wrong. Someone here, Chet, certainly practices asset-based community development. That's right out of the ABCD playbook, right? Focus on what's strong. And let's see, any other questions? Volunteering at a concession stand. Yeah, finding ways to volunteer in your community is a way to build place attachment. I think you shared some examples of that in your book as well. That's certainly something we all can do. And then Eric's question, how do you talk about the value of place attachment to community leaders, such as a community development department director? But how do we explain the value of place attachment?
So there's two ways that I can think about this. One, I like to talk to community leaders about place attachment as being their why, or at least part of their why. when you understand place attachment and maybe have a sense of how attached you are, how much attachment figures into your work in your community, why you chose this community, why you chose this kind of work, it can help you have an understanding of why you're doing what you're doing and why it matters. And I think that can be really helpful. I often end up talking to groups of, economic development leaders or municipal leaders. And I want them to understand that through the challenges that come with any sort of civic leadership these days, there's a reason you chose to do this. And you can't let that relationship with your community go. It's interesting because I have a chapter in the book, This Is Where You Belong, about civic engagement, and, talk about that. There's a lot of research that shows people, there's a reciprocal relationship there. People become civically engaged, including, taking on roles, paid or unpaid, in the community because they're attached. And because they're attached, they gravitate towards those roles. And so, my advice back then was like, run for office and get involved. And I think I I think, the world has changed a bit since then, and also maybe my understanding. And now I sort of recognize that those positions can actually sometimes make you like your town less. You see how the sausage is getting made, you deal with all the problems, you have to deal with people's criticisms of you. And so in that struggle, it is not only helpful, but I would say necessary to keep your eye on the reason for doing it, which is that you love this place and you want it to be better, and you have, some level of connection. And if you don't, because I do think it's possible to be in a community leadership position and not have that, it is something you should work on. Become intentional about enjoying your place and appreciating it, and doing some of these, little experiments to boost your own place attachment. So
Yeah.
I think that's part of it. And then the other part is I think it's important for people who work in community leadership, like this example, community development department director, to understand what place attachment does for the people who live in your community and where it comes from, and, why it matters. So, for instance, I would say that a lot of what fosters a feeling of place attachment among residents are things like building community relationships, or feeling like you have a strong quality of life in your town. And understanding that might provide you a little direction as you think about, how are we spending our money and our time? How are we investing in our community? What really matters here? Because doing things that foster place attachment is, I think, important for community leaders. I've aware of one community in Texas that has started to measure place attachment, like survey residents on place attachment, because, what better way to see how you're doing than to see how much your residents love where they live and feel like they belong there.
Yeah.
While we're talking about it, if you want, I could give y'all a place attachment quiz so you can see how attached you are to your place.
I think that would be fun.
Okay.
Everybody can score along here.
Score along. This is something that I do, when I speak, because I think it is, and it's in the book. So this is, some of you have already seen this for sure. But these are just some kind of statements that maybe will help you flesh out or understand a little bit more about how place attachment might feel for you. And the reason I think it's interesting is sometimes the answers aren't totally what you expected. David, you mentioned that I spoke in Oklahoma not too long ago, and I had someone come up afterward to me and say, when you started talking about place attachment, I was like, oh, I hate it here. Like I'm going to do this quiz and I'm going to score so poorly. And they ended up discovering that they were in fact place attached, to this place that they would have said they did not like living. And I've had the opposite happen too, where people kind of realize, oh my gosh, I am not as attached as maybe I want to be. So what's going to happen in the book? There's a list of 24 statements, and I will only give you 10, and I just want you to kind of think for yourself for where you live currently, where you call home. Is the answer yes for you? So for instance, number one, I feel like I belong in this community. So think to yourself, yes or no, and then just keep track of how many times you say yes out of 10. Okay, so that was number one. I feel like I belong in this community. Number two, I know my way around. Number three, the friendships and associations I have with other people in this town mean a lot to me. Number four, I like to tell people about where I live. Number five, if I could live anywhere in the world, I would live here. Number six, if something exciting were happening in this community, I'd want to be involved. Number seven, my town isn't perfect, but there are a lot of things that make me love it. Number eight, the people who live here are my kind of people. Number nine, I feel loyal to this community. And number 10, it feels like home. So maybe some of you want to put your scores in the chat and we will see how you did. So yeah, just, what was your score out of 10? Maybe you got a perfect 10, and that will tell you that, yeah, all yeses. So you are deeply place attached to your community. Goodness, you guys are doing well.
This group is really attached, which probably is why they're so interested in the topic, right? Already, or interested in the topic because they are attached, or there's an interplay here. I would expect to see higher numbers, but some people may. Jennifer may want to move towns. I see, so that's okay. I can pick on Jennifer.
Yeah, well, and that's okay too, right? Like sometimes you take the quiz and I'll be in a big room doing a presentation about this, and have the 9s and the 10s raise their hand, and everyone's very proud to say that they scored a 9 or a 10, and then we'll maybe have a few or more like 7, and then when you say like who scored a 3 or below, and there's always like one super embarrassed person like reluctant to admit this, and sometimes I think people will not raise their hand at all, and so sometimes we see that as a reflection of ourselves or maybe our place, but yeah, like you said, Laura said, I'm still new here. And that's exactly how it works. Place attachment takes time to develop, and it also can waver over time. It has its ups and downs. I don't know how y'all feel, but I tend to like my place a little less in the winter. And then, a beautiful spring day comes and you're like, I love it here. All of a sudden you're back at a 10. So.
And you got the language down pat because you just used y'all.
Yes.
In a sentence. So you're obviously very attached to the area.
When we moved here, I started kind of testing the waters with y'all. And my kids were like, no, you cannot say that. you are embarrassing us. And then, we've been here 11 years now. So I feel like I've earned the right to say y'all.
Absolutely.
I don't
Absolutely.
know.
Well, I love that quiz and what it kind of brings to the table to think about this topic. A couple of things that come to mind as we were talking about volunteering, taking on sort of civic roles in the community. You're right. You see, it can be a great experience, a great way to volunteer, but you can also kind of see the downside. Like someone had mentioned planning and zoning board. Well, that's a great way to serve. It can also be a great way to make some of your neighbors really mad at you over planning and zoning issues. But it is a great way to serve, and there's always positions open, as Jennifer noted. There's always positions that a mayor can fill. I often note that there's probably maybe nothing I can do that impacts Washington, D.C., very little I can ever do that impacts my state capital, but I can make a choice every day that impacts my neighborhood and those around me. So you can, a little bit of effort can have great impact. And that does build that social capital and the feeling about where you live, and grows that love for your town. Something you had mentioned earlier. Oh, I think it's in your book. You talk about even eating with neighbors or dinner with neighbors or things. A lady a few weeks ago was telling me about, she was new to her neighborhood and it had been a week and no one had come and introduced themselves to her. Not a single neighbor. So she did a reverse neighbor introduction. She made cookies for all of her neighbors and she went and introduced herself to her neighbors as the new person. Here I am. So she took that action, took those steps, and that was impactful. Sometimes, like you did on your move, you have to take those actions yourself. No one's going to do it for you.
Right. And I think, that woman could have said, no one came and visited me, and been mad, or felt disconnected from her neighborhood forever. And but not every place has that culture, and if that is important to you, then you go be the one to take cookies around to people. Like I have a whole chapter in This Is Where You Belong about neighbor relationships and what that means to us in our place attachment. And it really is, as time has gone on and I've talked to people about this, I think I really can say that the number one factor influencing people's sense of attachment in their community is their relationships in their place. And,
Wow.
whether you feel like you have friends in your community, because, that's not how we choose places, right? we choose places because they're beautiful, or because they have a low cost of living, or they have amenities that we value. Most of the time, unless we're moving someplace where we have family or where we grew up or have a pre-existing connection, we're moving to a community based on a hope and a dream that this will be a good fit for us. But at the end of the day, if you can't over time develop relationships in your community to your own satisfaction, then you won't ever really feel deeply attached. You may like your place, you may not want to move, you may be fine living there. And I think everyone has kind of different levels of need there. I'm pretty introverted, so it doesn't take a ton to fill up my, my need for social interaction. But it really is incredibly important. And I think neighborhoods is where that starts. It is your first introduction to your place. And if you can, find even, loose tie sort of connections within your neighborhood, it's going to make you feel a lot better about the community as a whole.
Do you find anything, what's common to the communities that do place attachment well? I know you referenced a couple of studies that kind of measure, I think one of them is the soul of the community study. I made another study where Grand Forks, North Dakota ranked really high in place attachment and things. Are there some similarities that help those places rank high in place attachment? Is it just because they have a great music venue, or is it other things?
So yeah, the soul of the community is something I wrote about. It was a partnership between Gallup and the Knight Foundation, and they surveyed communities about or community residents, I should say, in I think 26 different communities across the country about how they felt about their place. And this was a 3-year study, and when they tallied everything up, they were able to identify 3 basic qualities that were common to communities that had high levels of place attachment. So first was social offerings, which is what we've been talking about. Not only feeling like your town has things to do, but people to do them with. Second was aesthetics. People just wanted to feel like they lived in a beautiful, attractive place. And third was openness, which was kind of like a combination of how many opportunities are there in your community for all different kinds of people, but also, how welcoming is your town to newcomers and and to people of different cultures and backgrounds and things like that. So social offerings, aesthetics, and openness were really kind of the uniting factor. And the study found that towns that were ranked highly on those 3 things um, did better on measures of place attachment, and that when they did better on measures of place attachment, the town was also more likely to have a higher local GDP. So town was doing better economically because people in the community were place attached. You mentioned Grand Forks, and I think the thing that is interesting to think about with this study is that it included some big cities like Miami and Denver and Charlotte, but also some really small towns. And North Dakota plus North Carolina. And it was a pretty big stretch, a mix of different kinds of communities. And in that first year of the study, the town that did the best on measures of social offerings, so that, measure of we have lots to do here and people to do it with, was Grand Forks, North Dakota. And it beat out the big cities like Denver and Miami. And the thing that I think is so fascinating about that is it shows you that place attachment really is very much based on perception. That this is not that our towns have to be amazing, they have to have all the amenities, they have to be perfect. There is something about people who live there are choosing to be happy with it, and Grand Forks, I think I have never been to Grand Forks, but I have been to North Dakota, and I'm gonna go out on a limb and just say they are not competing with Miami on like beaches and much bigger cities on like all the amenities, the sports teams and the art museums and stuff like that. But that wasn't what mattered to place attachment. Place attachment was simply, yeah, like this is good enough. I'm happy here. And I think that's interesting. It shows us how much of this is sort of within our power to choose for ourselves, that we don't have to be in a big city. We don't have to even be in like our dream community to simply realize that we're fine. We're happy with what we're living with right now. So
I've
that's
heard,
kind of nice.
yeah, I've heard it noted before for leadership, for community leadership. One of the reasons this place attachment is so important is because your residents are actually your greatest tool for PR. They can be. When they always have great things to say about your community, and recruiters or companies coming in, they will sometimes come in sort of secretly and survey people, residents, and hang out at a local cafe and ask people what they think of their town. If they're saying great things, that's a factor. And it can be these aesthetics or something that's in the town, or it can be a festival. I think of a neighbor that I have who's from Kellogg, Michigan, and they go back every year to Kellogg. They have a festival there. It's called the world's biggest breakfast. And they line the main street with tables, and everybody gets a cereal bowl, and it's, because Kellogg's is there, and you eat bowls of cereal with your neighbors and friends up and down Main Street. I can see how that fits with Kellogg, right, as a town. It's not something I would travel back for, but by golly, they do. And she talks about that all the time. I'm sure Kellogg has other fine attributes. That's just the one I hear her talk about all the time. So yeah, your residents can be great PR tools for your community. It can be those festivals or events. And I think you found some of those as well.
Yeah, so I recently spoke in a small town called Elkin, North Carolina. And Elkin was a town that had seen I think the voice is finally starting to catch up to me.
You need to take a breather.
No, I'll muscle through. I'm sucking on a cough drop, so I apologize.
Okay.
But it was a former mill town, had seen, a lot of disinvestment, people move away, it shrank. And before the pandemic, lots of empty storefronts on the main street, a situation that we've seen in, all across the country in small communities. And the town just sort of wouldn't let it happen. And decided that the way out of this was, they didn't call it this, but sort of a collective place attachment explosion. So Jeff Edson, who's a guy who's lived there his whole life, gathered people from the community, and they formed a group called Elkin Explorers. And it's basically like a homegrown convention and visitors bureau. Maybe everyone in the group pitched in $100 or $200. They use that money to put on community events like Food Truck Friday or concerts in the park during the summer. But they've also created this culture of being proud of your town, just having a sense of good things are happening in Elkin. And I was there a couple weeks ago, and they were having an Elkin Explorer event, and they talked about all the sort of progress that they've made in their town in the past couple years. But one of the stories Jeff always talks about is when the town is a few miles off the main highway, but when he goes out to fill up his truck with gas at the highway, if there's someone at the pump next to him, he will talk about Elkin, and he will ask you if you've been, and he will tell you which restaurants to go to and what events they have coming up. And he's like, if we can get 500 people doing that, what kind of impact will that have on our town? So, they're not probably going to get 500 people who are brave enough to, talk up a stranger at the gas station, but they might get 500 people who have that mindset of our town is worth bragging about, and our town is a great place to live. And that changes your town when the residents who live there think we've got something really good. And, and it was like the economic development director drove me around and showed off their community. And by the end of the night, I'm like, oh, I could totally live here. Like we should relocate. And, she was just bragging on all these cool small businesses they have downtown now. And, how great it is to be in walking distance to the library and the high school and stuff like that. And, I think that is a powerful culture to create in your town.
Absolutely.
And Michelle, I love your comments so much. Thank you. I want you to email me. I really want to see this website. It's mw@melodywarnick.com if you want to send me an email. I'm really interested in how towns welcome newcomers. I think it is so important. So I'd love to see an example of that.
Well, Michelle, she loves Raleigh, and I can attest her
I do.
website is wonderful, and she's got a lawn art with neighbors project going on, and she's a really advocate. I may have interrupted you, Michelle. Jump in there with what you were going to share.
No, I'm thrilled to be able to thank Melody personally. Like this has just been the highlight of this month, because you really have had a massive impact in my life. Because I love Raleigh, but I'm an introvert. I was not connected. I have my little tight group. But I read your book, and it was right before COVID, and I'm like, and then Raleigh is growing 100 people a day. And so there's an us and them happening, and just this isn't like New York, and this isn't like, and so I just started feeling this pull of, this is a great place. How do we keep it great? How do we foster that culture of, this is what Raleigh is, and this is what we want to hold on to as we grow? And so I just, during COVID, had not a whole lot to do in some areas. So I created the website and just started reaching out to people. And especially like if I saw them on social media and they were saying like, I'm lonely, or there's nothing to do here. I just started like seeding social media. Hey, have you thought about this? Or call me or something. And it's very much outside my comfort zone to do something like that. But when I read your book, I'm like, this is where the strength of a city comes, is if we can connect. And then David, I had found out about lawn art with neighbors. So I'm right in the middle of trying to organize that. And that's like craziness, to do art in the community. So it's rare that you get to just tell someone that they changed your life or really help make it better. So I just wanted to say that to you.
Oh my gosh. Well, you made my month. That was really lovely to hear. I'm so happy. And it just sounds like, I love to hear stories of people who just decide they're gonna be awesome in their community and make it better. I'm just endlessly impressed by that. And that is, yeah.
Well, it
Yeah,
started with what you said in terms of, I thought, well, I'll be on the city council, or I'll do this or do that. And then I thought, no, I just felt more grassroots, that it just needed to be like neighbor to neighbor, person to person. And so I just thought it's too pressure filled to be like part of the official city structure or whatever.
yeah, for sure. And please do put your website in the chat. So like
Okay.
everyone is asking for it.
Oh,
Yes,
thank
yes.
you. And I love this group. I love all you guys. I look forward to this every month.
I actually think like that's such a cool idea. Like my town and probably yours too, we have a Facebook group. Ours is Everything Blacksburg, and it really has just become a place where people go and recommend a doctor or whatever. And it's interesting to see how there are certain people on there who just always are going to be negative about the town, and they're always going to like, oh, the city council, they're evil. And then you have other people who love Blacksburg, and you can tell. And so that thought of having a Michelle in that group, like just kind of secretly trying to help people find their place in Raleigh, I think that is so cool.
Well, maybe Jennifer and Eric will join in and say this with me together. Let's remember to look for what's strong, not what is wrong, right? So that's the essence of what you're saying, and one of the ways we can all do this. So I think we probably have time for one last question, maybe. And I see Eric had one in the chat, which is why I mentioned that. Oops, I scrolled past it.
And Chet has his hand raised.
Oh, okay. We'll jump to chat there, and I'll look for Eric's.
Thanks, dude. Michelle, your welcoming inspiration reminded me of a topic that comes up with some neighborhood civic groups that I've been a part of, as far as like you hear about a welcome wagon. And I've thought a little bit about like, I don't know if anybody has any links to any good resources of like, what that welcome package might look like. Is it a printed folder? Is it a postcard with a QR code to a shared Google Doc? I don't know, but I just want to throw out the group to see if anybody has suggestions for resources, like what a welcome wagon packet might look like.
That's a great question. Michelle, did you have
I
any?
think in our neighborhood, I've found, and I'm in the process of trying to collect them all. A lot of our HOAs, not a lot, but several of the HOAs have their own welcome packet, like to the neighborhood. And that has like local neighborhood things with maybe coupons to the neighborhood, local businesses. What I'm trying to do in terms of Raleigh onboarding is make it like a bigger thing where we have almost like an onboarding package that is sent to everyone that also involves all local businesses, and that they could put coupons in it for their local business, and we could tell about the owners of the business, because I want that connection of this business is owned by this person that is also your neighbor kind of thing.
Yeah.
But a lot of them just are, some do QR codes. So they have something online and they just have a QR code that they send out with because it's cheap, like a little welcome postcard. And so they can click on the QR code and it takes them to a list of resources in the community. But we're also trying to, in Raleigh, we're trying to put together like actual workshops, like welcome to Raleigh workshops. And I'm working with some people to try and get that, where we explain like, here's how the city government works, here's how, trash works, here's all, just to bring people together. And also in that 20 or 25 person group, now you have 25 people that you didn't know before you came to the workshop.
And who are also newcomers who
Yes.
need friends, like I think that's an easier friend group to access, the people who, like you, are new to town.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a lot of apartment complexes have welcome packets. You could ask to Raleigh's about 50% people who live in apartments. And a lot of the apartments have their own like welcome folders for their people. So I've gathered a couple of those from local apartments near me. And the welcome wagon still exists. They still send out packages to people with coupons in it as well. So there's a ton of different ways depending on how much money you have and how many people to help you get the info out.
Excellent. Well, I see I did post a blog link in there because I've had conversation recently with several people about welcome kits. So that's a link to a post that has some ideas you're interested in it. It'll include in that a link to Hopeful Neighborhood, because I know Jennifer is working on a welcome kit that will be available soon, that would probably maybe supplement or could be used in conjunction with what you're putting together in terms of local ideas, local connections. It's a real handy tool idea that they're working on. So, and I think she may have mentioned that in chat as well. So there's some ideas. Well, this last question from Eric, I did find that, and Melody, he had asked, have you seen communities structure themselves to inspire and enable people to build a place of openness, social offering, aesthetics, communities that have made I think when he's asking, a real purposeful decision or some changes to kind of create those types of things?
Yeah, I think we've seen more and more communities who may or may not know about place attachment, but who understand that as we think about, these anywhereists who are able to choose where to live, and, how thoughtful a lot of us are becoming about our places, that they need to offer quality of life, that it isn't enough to just be a place that has a lot of jobs, that we're choosing places that are enjoyable to live. And so, I think I've seen a lot of examples of that around the country, of places that are, prioritizing public spaces or parks, places that can be beautiful, that can be gathering places, towns that are doing lots of events like Elkin, or, places that have worked hard to create communities that are welcoming, like the examples that we've been talking about here. So I think it is, I think we see it a lot, but it's definitely something that probably every town still needs to work on, prioritizing, those events that bring people together, prioritizing things that make our communities beautiful and enjoyable, like walking paths and parks and trees and stuff like that. And I think that, the openness you can't always build for as much, but it comes along when people feel connected to each other, then, they're feeling some joy in their community. And I think that's really what place attachment is how we experience joy in our towns, because, we love them and we're happy to be there. So it's, just a way to make your life a little better in your place.
Well, Melanie, thank you for making time to join us today and for muscling through there with the cough. And we're thankful for cough drops. And
Aren't we though?
if you have not read her 2 books, especially This Is Where You Belong, but really either one of them, I'd recommend that you buy them or borrow them or listen to them on Audible. Really excellent resources. And we really appreciate you being with us today. And I will end the recording and